Welcome to another edition of What Are You Reading? What Are You Writing? I hope this isn't your first time to join us and that you know who I am, but I am Karen E. Osborn. I am author of Getting It Right and Tangled Lies, which was just released this July, and the upcoming book Reckonings, which is coming out next June. And today, so that's one thing I'm excited about to share with you, that I have another book coming out. But even more importantly, I want to share with you our very special guest. You are going to love her. She's laughing, but it's true. She is an entrepreneur. She is a journalist, an Emmy-winning broadcaster. She's a historian, and she is a nonfiction author. Her books, Sister Days, Freedom Days, and Glory Days, and also her wonderful educational venture, which is called BackPax, P-A-X, BackPaxKids. And she's going to tell us all about all of this in a minute. Welcome, welcome, Janice.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here, Karen. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad that you're here. So we're going to have so much fun. So you have had this extraordinary career and life. In fact, I love listening to stories about Janice that she tells, not that other people tell. She just had this incredible, amazing career. And the thread that I see, and I'm going to ask her about it, but it seems to me that the thread is championing social justice, that she cares deeply, deeply about the history of African Americans, but in the greater context, so that it's important to all people of all races and all ethnic backgrounds. So could you tell us a little bit about what you are doing now in that space? Kind of what's going on now with you?
Well, there are a couple of things going on. One, thanks for asking. I'm working on a new book, and we can get to that. I am, and it is a memoir. And secondly, I look at my work in the space that I call from myself, my branding, is history, healing, and hope. That's the way I look at what it is that I'm trying to do. And I have learned to, or come to need to, use my understanding of journalism and my understanding of history and use those together to say, but what are we doing? What can make our intellectual quality of life better? And so in that space, I've used my background as a historian, as an entrepreneur as well, to create a series. Actually, it was inspired by the Ford Foundation requesting that I do this study on teaching educators to use marketing to improve their own positioning, especially for grants and sustainability. You understand that space, philanthropy and all of that. And I ended up turning it into a board game of all things.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
That they could send. I am a board game designer. I started with doing board games for young people first, and then brought it into this other space because I had the skill. And what my concern was how to not just write another piece of paper that they put up on the shelf and put away, but engage people. And that's what I love about board games. And right now, and especially as we're doing this, I don't know when it's going to air, but as we're doing this, it is Black Business Awareness Month. And in that space, that board game for Educators has became a board game that I then created as well, called A Way Out of No Way, to teach entrepreneurism to everybody. I mean, especially when you talk about social justice, which is just basic decency and human rights. The question becomes, we're in a very difficult time in this country right now, to say the least. And it's not something we haven't seen before. We know how pathological it is, I'm going to say it that way, how depraved some of it is. We know that. And unfortunately, as a historian, I've had to ingest a little bit more of it than I would like to. But I'm also interested in turning that around and saying, so what do we do now? Okay, we know that experience. We know that some very rough things are taking place right now, including trying to erase voting rights all over again. But what are we going to do? And my thing with this board game to teach entrepreneurism has been saying, you know, honestly, it comes from the Black phrase that how we've come through this is by making a way out of no way. And that is the name of the board game, to teach everyone the skills. I'm not saying this is an MBA in a box. No, I'm not. But I am saying that when you know the skills, when you begin to understand what questions to ask, you can make a living and a life for yourself and others. And that's what I'm looking at doing right now. So that's how I'm using the things that...
all the things that matter to you in lots of creative ways. You are always so creative. So go back for me to your childhood, and what books perhaps that you read, where did some of this come from? I know some of it must have come outside of books, but was there, what were you like as a child reader that might have informed some of what you're doing now?
Well, my mom made me a child reader very, very young, my mom and my dad. But she was a teacher. So I went to kindergarten a year early at 4 because I went already reading. So that tells me something about, even though I don't remember in that sense, but it tells me something about what was going on in our home. In our home, also, my grandfather who was not formally schooled. In fact, he was denied the ability to be formally schooled, but he trained himself. And when he came to the United States, he went to night school and really developed his skills. And so he becomes a family historian, and he becomes the one who's training us all in terms of critical thinking, literally, and in terms of what we need to know. And he started it with his little girls, my mom and her 2 sisters, when they were young, and then brought it to my cousin and me. But my favorite book to go there as a result, you can the patterning of all of this was a little engine that could.
One of my personal favorites that I read to all my grandsons.
Absolutely. I mean, that was the mantra. At 8 years old, I became one of the 4 children selected to break de facto segregation in the North. We started with New York City. My cousin and I and 2 others were the 4 who were taken from the all-Black school in Harlem to go to the all-white school in Upper Manhattan. And so that early priming was, they did not know when they were training us at 3 and 4, reading and all of this, that that's what was going to happen. But they did know that they wanted the tide to turn. and that they wanted to do whatever they could to make that happen. And so a book like The Little Engine That Could was central to that. And I just remembered, now that you say what were my favorite books, I don't remember the name of it, but it could have been the one line that I remember, because it goes with the entrepreneurism, and it was Bobby had a nickel, all his very own. Should he buy this or an ice cream cone? And it went into all the decisions that Bobby was making with his nickel. And at that point, yes, a nickel meant he could buy something.
Unlike today, Bobby had $5, and what could he do? That is wonderful. So as you are thinking about today and the world that we're in today, are there some books that you could recommend to our audience that they should be reading now?
Well, 3 books that I have been reading, just 2 that I've just finished, 1 that I've just been rereading. I'll go to those. Cicely Tyson's Just As I Am, I just absolutely love. And the idea that it came out, I believe, on a Tuesday. She did her pre-interviews for the book, and by that weekend, she had died.
She was gone.
At 96 or 97?
Yeah.
97. Is really quite something, but the book is just an extraordinary rendering of a life. And I love the fact that she is so honest in it. Unbelievably honest in certain points. And even because of when she completed it, she even speaks to the issue of George Floyd. And so you have this person born in December 1924. So that answers my question. She was 96 when she died. She would have been 97 this December. And she even is speaking to that and to these human rights issues that were definitely something that she experienced growing up. She speaks to matters of women's rights and the rights of women married to men who are not doing and behaving the way they should, violent men or men who, at home choose to do their Me Too behavior. The second book that I absolutely am passionate about, and he was a guest on my show, is the book How the Word is Passed.
Yes.
By Clint Smith.
Yes.
And it is a tough and truthful story that needs to be told. It is a reckoning with the history of slavery in America. But what I so love about the book, and as I say, he was a guest on my show, and so we had the opportunity to really go into, I had the opportunity to ask him certain things, and it was about his life as a poet. And because that so comes through, it is his language as a poet that makes not the history bearable, but makes the understanding and the conversation about the history bearable, and gives back to the people who lived it the humanity that was denied to them, just because of the way he voices what needs to be said.
Now, before you go on, please tell our audience about just tell us briefly about your show. You've mentioned your show a couple of times, so just tell them briefly.
I'm a former NPR correspondent, and I've used that over the years, stayed in radio, in the radio space. I host a public radio show called the Janus Adams Show, which is also a podcast. And the theme of the show is race and courage. It is a weekly 1-hour program. And oh my goodness, I've had such a range of guests. I was also, when we talk about these human rights issues and entrepreneurism, I recently also had Dawn Porter, who is the filmmaker behind the John Lewis film, Good Trouble. And then she returned to the show, just as an example, with a wonderful take on Black Wall Street called Rise Again, Tulsa and the Red Summer of 1919. So she puts it in context, in the larger context, and acting as though what happened in Tulsa in 1921, it needs to be spoken of and dealt with, but we also have to understand it in the larger context. So I've gotten to do guests like that, to musicians, to politicians,
That's
to
wonderful.
people whose names you've never heard of. And I'm thrilled to have them on the show because of the unique perspective that they bring.
Isn't that the wonderful thing about it, is that you're introducing us to so many intriguing people, not just names that you do know, but names that you should know. So that's a wonderful thing. So you said in the beginning that you were working on a memoir. Could you just give us a little brief kind of where you are in that process and what inspired
I will,
you?
and I just want to go back to one other thing, but it ties in with the memoir. The third book that I don't want to forget to mention is a book by Jodie Patterson, and it is called The Bold World. And it is about her coming to terms with what she calls her job being to keep her son alive. She is the mother of a transgender son. So in this understanding of human rights, I mean, instead of this siloing, oh no, this is about women's rights. Oh no, this is about no, this is about human rights. It's about human dignity and just rank decency. And who gives you the right to destroy someone else's life? Yes. And so Jodie speaks just beautifully. She too has the voice of a poet about her own life and the strength that she brought to this child who she thought would be her second daughter, and finds that he is her first transgender child. And in the midst of the madness of some people, she does see her mission, and that's why I didn't want to not mention that book as keeping her child alive, because so many children are going through that level of despair because of other people's problems.
Beautifully said. So we only have a few minutes left. Unfortunately, I think we should do like part 1, Janus Adams part 1 and Janus Adams part 2. But if you could just tell us a little bit about what you're working on now, because you have had such an extraordinary life. Is this an autobiography, or is this really
a memoir? This is a memoir and
a portion of your life.
Exactly. And it focuses, yes, on issues like I've just named or mentioned, this growing up a Northern school desegregation pioneer. But I really, in this book, am looking at the intersection between my life as a journalist and my life as a historian, and where those two things come together with our understanding that just how personal. We think of history so far in the past, but it isn't. It's personal. We think of journalists as this objectivity, and we do attempt to be, but it too is personal. And I wanted to bring those two things together in this journey, my journey from history to healing and hope.
I love that. History, healing, and hope. That is just so beautiful. And you can find all of I love Glory Days. These books are wonderful. They take every day, 365 inspired moments in African American history. And it is something that not just for African Americans to read, it's something for people to read. And it's beautifully written. Janice is a lovely, lovely writer. And she's asked my grandson, my 10-year-old grandson, to read her BackPaxKids, which is history book, little history booklets for 10-year-olds and a little above and a little below.
They are, I will say that those books are actually companions to the journey that also is audio, using my experiences as an broadcast journalist and producer. So it's engaging children in history and culture through travel and adventure.
See, I told you she's had an incredible life, and she's a Renaissance woman. So where can people find you? Where are all the places that if somebody wants to know more about you, more about your books, more about your board games, where can they go?
They can go to my website, janusadams.com,
Janice.
Janus, for January, and for the historian, looking forward and looking back. January, JANUS Adams, ADAMS.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I so appreciate you being on, and I hope you will come back, because there are so many more things that we could be talking about that I would like to talk about and get into more depth. So until the next time that you come back to what are you reading, what are you writing for our future episodes, and one of them is going to be Janice coming back. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and I'll see you next time.